From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for Thunder Thursday. Thunder Thursday's back, guys. That means the Thunder and the NBA season is nearly upon us. Our weekly extended look at Thunder basketball starts this week, continues throughout the season. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, Thunder beat writer Eric Horn. Eric, everything's gotten going in earnest. Media day on Monday, first day of practice Tuesday. You've been out, you've seen a lot. Just kind of give us a general sense of things right now as things have gotten going for the Thunder.
Relatively low key right now for the Thunder. They're just trying to get used to each other. A lot of new faces. Dennis Schroeder being one of them. He's a really important guy to what they have going on, and he's a guy who is going to be starting for Russell Westbrook in the preseason. I think that's been probably the most important part of the first couple of days, is seeing how he gets acclimated to the style that Billy Donovan wants to play and see how he leads. And so far, it's been pretty. Not much to report, just kind of getting the eye on some of these guys that are in there, particularly Andre Roberson on the floor. Russell Westbrook has yet to participate in anything. He's just kind of walking around or sitting on the side. And I think the real action will start probably in a week or so once these guys start to get a little bit more into doing some stuff like Andre Roberson and Russell Westbrook.
We'll dive a little bit more into a lot of what you just hit on briefly. But before we do that, Barry, you were out at Media Day. You were in the interview room, the main interview room throughout the day. What were your impressions of this team? Anything stand out to you after a couple hours of interviews on Monday?
Well, what sort of struck me was just how new a lot of this is. I didn't even realize it until I was talking, until we were interviewing Alex Abrinas. But I did a quick glance at the roster. He's fourth ranking in service on this team, Alex Abrinas, and he's been here for 2 full seasons and no more. He never played with Serge Ibaka. He never played with Kevin Durant. And just a whole lot of newness on this team when you get past Russell Westbrook, Steven Adams, and Andre Roberson.
Yeah, definitely. You talk about continuity, and the Thunder does, but it's the core. It's not, you look at the role players, and they have changed a lot. Well, let's talk about some of these deeper issues that are going to be on everybody's mind as things really get rolling. Let's start with Andre Roberson, Eric. We know, obviously, he's coming back after that season-ending injury a year ago. Almost, it'll be a year in December that he's been away from basketball, a long time. What's his prognosis right now? We saw just how important he is defensively to this team and what they can and can't do. So where does he stand in the rehab process?
He's still non-contact. He's going through some positional drills and things like that. After practice, you can see him kind of jogging around. He'll play around. And he's not doing a bunch of sharp cutting or anything like that. He looks like he's still a pretty good ways away from being in like an actual game action. He's moving briskly, taking some jumpers, not getting a lot of elevation when he does take those shots. They're more set shots when he does, but he is participating in some things. The Thunder's been contact for the first couple of days of practice, so obviously he hasn't been able to take a part in a lot of those exercises, but he's been there along with Russell Westbrook kind of instructing guys and helping them out. But I wouldn't expect to see him through preseason. He just doesn't look like he's in a position to where he could play just yet. But earlier into the regular season, maybe 2 handfuls of games in, you might see Robertson get out there, but I wouldn't expect anything for the first month from him, and they're not going to push him back, frankly. I think you'd probably stand a better chance of seeing Russell Westbrook come back before you see Andre Robertson at this point.
That's interesting. Barry, as you think about Robertson and his role on this team, again, we were reminded of it after he was gone last year. What do they need? It's a lot he's coming back from. They need him to be as good as he can possibly be, obviously, but the what-if scenarios start coming in. What if he's not quite what he was before the injury? We have no way to know. Just a lot of variables here for a guy that they really need some good play out of.
Yeah, and the key with Andre is this. Eric said it. They're not going to rush him. They're not going to push him because the playoffs are where they really need him because when you're playing the Houstons and the Golden States, that's when Andre Roberson's value goes through the roof. And if it means a few more losses by him not playing for another month or whatever, then the Thunder's willing to take that because his value is exponentially larger against the better teams. Now, without him, they'll just piece it together. They'll go more offensive-minded with Abrinas or maybe Terrence Ferguson or try to get a reasonable facsimile with TLC. But definitely, they need Andre Roberson at crunch time in the playoffs against the best teams because he's an elite defender, an elite talent. Whatever that skill, whatever that talent is, matters in the playoffs.
Barry struck on a good point there. I think Sam Presti and the Thunder are approaching this as they want to be a better team at the end of the season. They want to be at their strongest going into the playoffs and at the end of the season. If they're not, then shame on them, barring injuries. But the beginning of the schedule sets up pretty well for the Thunder, particularly the 2018 slate. Once they get to 19 and the year rolls over, the schedule's going to get a lot tougher. But in these first couple of months, they have an opportunity to where even if they're missing guys, they can still go and win some games. They got a lot of games against the Atlantas and the Sacramentos and the Dallases of the world where they're going to be able to have a guy like Dennis Schroeder get quality minutes, have guys like Patrick Patterson and Alex Abrinas be able to get quality minutes, and maybe not have to tax Russell Westbrook and Andre Robertson as much as they should. Now, we said that the Thunder has to get off to a great start, and I think that's true because the beginning of the schedule is weak, but they would always rather have their strongest team at the end of the year. And if you've got to sit Andre Robertson for the beginning part of the year, if you've got to sit Russell Westbrook, so be it. You just have to have those guys strong on the back end of the schedule.
You talk about having your strongest team at the end of the year, and Dennis Schroeder is an interesting piece to that puzzle in my mind because we haven't seen him, obviously, with this team. He's an addition in that trade that sent Carmelo to Atlanta. Ultimately, they waive him. He's in Houston now. But he's been at least with this team longer than Carmelo was a year ago when Carmelo landed in Oklahoma City a couple days before they started. So you get the feeling like maybe the Thunder has a sense of what they could do with Dennis Schroeder as a second point guard. Barry, what can we look for early on? I mean, no Russell Westbrook, so obviously Dennis Schroeder's role to start things is going to be different than what it is going to be later, but how can he factor in to things to really help the Thunder later in the year, come playoff time?
Well, that remains to be seen whether, is he going to fully embrace the role that the Thunder has offered. There's reason to think positively, though, for this reason. Schroeder in Atlanta had it both ways. He was the sixth man, the backup point guard who played a bunch with the first unit, but also ran the second unit on two or three really good Atlanta teams. One year they won 60 games with Dennis Schroeder doing the role that he's largely asked to do in Oklahoma City. And then for a year or two, he got to be the main guy, be the star point guard on a really bad team. I don't think being the star point guard on a really bad team was all that fun for him. I mean, what did Atlanta win? 23 games, 19 games, whatever it was. I mean, that gets old fast. He gets to go back to that original, only a better role in terms of more star power, Paul George and Russell Westbrook, and he's got the chance to be a sixth man of the year candidate, a running buddy of Westbrook's at crunch time. Lots to like about that role if you embrace it. So I'm optimistic that he will, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah, and he said all the right things at Media Day and has done a lot of things that sort of give you an indication he's ready for a different type of role. Eric, what's the Thunder saying about their plans for how they're going to use Dennis Schroeder? Again, I acknowledge it's going to be different in the preseason or the early going, and then Russell Westbrook returns. But what are they saying right now about the plan for him?
Obviously he's going to start with Russell Westbrook out, and he might be the starter for the first handful of games or more if Westbrook's recovery bleeds into the regular season. But they want to play Russell Westbrook and Dennis Schroeder together. There's no reason why those guys can't play together. Actually, I take that back. There are some reasons those guys can't play together, and one of those reasons is defense. And Dennis Schroeder is a guy who admitted at Media Day that he did take a step back defensively. He chalked it up to having more responsibility in his last year in Atlanta than he'd had before. Frankly, that's not a good enough excuse. If a guy is going to be a starter in the league, he's got to be committed to both ends. Even if he's not very good at both ends, he has to be committed to it. Russell Westbrook, for as great as he is an offensive player, he has to be more committed to the defensive side. So does Schroeder. And if those two guys are going to play together, I think Billy Donovan said he's had candid conversations with Dennis Schroeder, and I think that's been part of these candid conversations. Dennis Schroeder's got to do his part on the defensive end. If the Thunder wants to be able to put their best lineups out there, I think that he and Russell Westbrook are going to have to make some alterations to their game, and it starts on defense.
It's also interesting to note that both of those guys in a league that is largely about outside shooting, those two guys are get to the rim, force the issue, maybe get there yourself or kick out to other guys, Barry, which is something, I was trying to think about where else have we, is there any other teams doing something similar? Obviously, nobody else has a Russell Westbrook, but because of the way that those two want to play offensively, there's not really a blueprint for this for the Thunder for Billy Donovan.
No. Complicating this is the fact that, hey, a lot of people put 2 point guards together. Houston did it to fabulous returns last season, but neither's a great shooter.
Yeah.
And if you got 2 guards that are not good outside shooters, you got all kinds of issues with your offense. Now, you create a lot of problems for a defense if you got Shrewder and Westbrook playing together. But you need to have a lot of shooting around, though. If those 2 guys are going to play together, you got to have a lot of shooting around them. Paul George, I assume Patrick Patterson.
You can't have Andre Roberson out there.
Probably
likely.
not have
Yeah.
Roberson. Grant's problematic. I mean, a lot of issues when you play those 2 together on both sides for both teams. I mean, they cause a lot of problems. You know, in some ways, it's like a really far out offense in football. You know, it's like the wishbone or the triple option in football. You're really limited in some things, but you really cause problems for the defense in other ways. So it's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be fascinating to watch. The Thunder, like always, are going to be fun. You know, they're not always as successful as we want, but you can never take your eyes off of them.
The interest level will be high, even in the preseason, Eric, because we just don't know what this is going to look like. Before we get to preseason, rotation, starters, that sort of thing, we're talking about stylistically as it relates to Westbrook, Shrewder, that matchup. But the larger issue of style play, that's come up ever since Billy Donovan came out at Summer League and said, we want to play faster. What's the take right now on where they stand stylistically on a broader level? What they want to do, what that's going to look like, how that's going to be different than years past?
Well, I mean, they always preach that they want to move the ball more, and it's more of a believe it when you see it kind of thing. You know, Shrewder in there for Russell Westbrook, you probably couldn't have a better replacement in terms of guards around the league if you want to imitate Russell Westbrook's style. They're both great in pick and roll. They both like to get downhill, get into the paint, and they're both guys who, frank for better or worse, like to shoot off the dribble. So that's something that's not going to have as much drop-off as you think when you have Dennis Shrewder in there. The question is, are they going to move the ball? Are they going to start a guy like a Patrick Patterson that's a ball mover that Billy Donovan likes? Or are they going to have a guy like Jeremy Grant starting? He's coming into a new contract. He's making a lot of money. Is that justification for Jeremy Grant to start? Or do they want Jeremy Grant to come off the bench in the role that he was comfortable with last year and he looked so good in? I still think they're going to play a similar style. You just like to see them move the ball a little bit more than they did last year, generate a little bit more ball movement, some better shots. And frankly, guys just need to make more shots. And when guys make more shots, it's going to change the way that the Thunder offense is approached by defenses. Alex Abrines didn't make a ton of shots last year. He still shot 38% from the field. Patrick Patterson didn't make that many shots. He was a guy who shot 38% from 3 as well. I said from the field. I meant Alex Abrines from 3 shot 38%. Those guys are good shooters. And if they can just make more shots and make more of the open shots, it's going to make Russell Westbrook and Dennis Schroeder's life a lot easier as well, and Steven Adams' life easier as well too. So Thunder's just got to move the ball more. It's easier said than done with the type of players that have the ball in their hands. But again, like Barry said, it's a wait and see approach.
Now, I actually think the ball will move more this season because
Bello.
Carmelo's going to play 0 minutes for Oklahoma City. Patrick Patterson's going to play more minutes. Patrick Patterson moves the ball. Nobody can say that. Now, and here's when you were talking about Abrines didn't make many shots and is a good shooter. When I see Alex Abrines take a 3-point shot, I generally think it's going in. Mm-hmm. When I see Jeremy Grant take a 3-point shot, I generally think he's not going to make it. Now, he ends up making a decent percentage for the kind of player he is. Abrines misses 62% last season. But just so you can tell, Alex Abrines is a shooter.
Yeah.
So let the guy shoot, keep him shooting.
All right, we're going to talk rotations here in a second. But before we get to that, as you guys are hitting on some of these guys, let's talk about who we might see in that starting rotation for the starting lineup for the preseason. Because Eric brings up a good point. While sometimes you have injuries and you move guys that you might not think are full-fledged starters, but you don't want to mess up your second line. You know, Shrewder is a decent comparison to Westbrook, so you don't really have to worry about that so much. So we've got Shrewder. We likely know Paul George will start in the preseason, probably Steven Adams. But what about other spots, Barry? Who you got in that starting rotation otherwise?
Well, with Roberson, you basically have 3 options, and it just depends on how he wants to go. Does he want to go with Alex Abrines? Probably that's where he would start out, I think. Abrines actually showed some defensive chops the later the season went on, and he's getting better at that. Terrence Ferguson is an intriguing prospect. He actually started a few games last year as a rookie when Roberson was out. And then you got TLC, who is the closest thing to an Andre Roberson. But just depends on which way they want to go. I think they'd probably start out with Abrinas, give him the shot, and see how that works out. And then, like I said, I think Patrick Patterson has to start at the power forward instead of Jeremy. As much as I like Jeremy Grant, I think Grant's probably a better player, but I think Patterson's a better fit with that starting lineup.
So Abrinas and Patterson in the starting lineup. Eric, you concur with that?
I think that Abrinas has earned the opportunity to start just from last year when Roberson got hurt. His defense just got so much better. I think he's earned that opportunity, and frankly, the Thunder just needs the spacing. He's the guy who can provide it the best at shooting guard. I'm still skeptical as to whether or not he will, because I know Billy Donovan likes to tinker and toy around. He might start a guy like Terrence Ferguson to start the season, or depending on how quickly TLC has picked up the scheme, he might start him because he's a stronger guy than Alex Abrinas. He's probably a little bit more athletic, not probably. But Alex Abrinas, sneaky athleticism. But I think he's earned the right to start there. I really do, and I'd like to see him start there just to see if he can build some chemistry with those starting guys and start to get his shot going and see his shot go in to start the season. And as Barry said, Patrick Patterson is the obvious starter for me, and not because Jeremy Grant's not capable of starting, but I think Jeremy Grant is ultimately going to end up playing as many minutes, if not more, as Patrick Patterson. But it's not as important for Jeremy Grant to start, and I think he was so comfortable in that role last year, coming off of the bench and being the energy guy and even playing some of that 5 position when Steven Adams was off the floor. I think that Jeremy Grant would be a natural guy to just stay in his regular position. And Patrick Patterson was supposed to be the starter to begin with.
Yeah.
And then Carmelo Anthony got dropped in 2 days before camp. Patrick Patterson looks like he's in good shape, has had some weight redistribution in the preseason. He's a guy who can shoot it well, and they need the spacing at power forward as well.
He does look strong. He sort of has that face chiseled thing that like Kevin Love did a couple years ago, where you're like, oh, that guy worked in the offseason to transform his body. Okay, so if Patrick Patterson starts in that 4 spot, likely stays there. If that's the preseason, he stays there once the regular season starts. How does the rotation change with Roberson? If he's back, moves into the starting rotation, how do the rest of these guys work? Barry, what do you sense as some of the likely rotational moves Billy Donovan has?
Well, the Thunder is like most NBA teams. They don't really have the wing talent they would like. They'd like to be even better on the wing. But when Roberson's back, the wing on the second unit actually gets very crowded. You got a lot of players there vying for time when you're talking about TLC and Alex Abrinas and Terrence Ferguson, and then even down to some of the younger guys with Abdel Nader and Hamidou Diallo. So it's a Diallo. So it's a case of he's got a lot of options on that second unit. Billy's one of these guys. He's shown us his method of operation over 3 years. He goes in streaks with players. Guy will be in the rotation for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then you won't see him for a week or two. Then he'll be back. Mm-hmm. So, if a guy gets in the doghouse, don't get too discouraged. You'll be back in the saddle and get another chance. But Billy is not going to play, I don't think, 12 guys at a time. I think he's going to limit it and then just change every couple of weeks.
So likely you're talking about one of those wing guys, Eric. Shrewder will move over to that second unit at some point when Westbrook is back. We likely won't see much of Raymond Felton, I don't think. But what about some of those forwards? And I assume Nerlens Noel is likely the 5 coming off the bench.
Now, you mentioned Raymond Felton. I think it's interesting. It depends on kind of the development and how quickly those younger guys are playing to Billy Donovan's liking. We might see some Raymond Felton at off guard because Raymond Felton's a reliable guy, and he was a pretty good catch and shoot 3-point shooter for the Thunder last year. I think Raymond Felton could stand to play alongside Dennis Schroeder or whoever is going to be coming off the bench when Russell Westbrook comes back. It'll probably be Schroeder and Raymond Felton. But at the 5, it's going to be interesting to see how much they can get out of Nerlens Noel. Nerlens is a guy who's coming in looking for a second opportunity to kind of reignite his career. He's on a 2-year deal with the Thunder, and we saw Jeremy Grant play a lot of that 5 last year. that's going to be Nerlens' opportunity to get some more minutes there, and maybe he and Jeremy Grant can play together in the second unit, or they're going to keep Jeremy Grant kind of staggered and bounce him between the first unit and the second unit and have Nerlens be the primary backup at the 5 to Steven Adams. And, Billy Donovan actually mentioned even playing Nerlens Noel alongside Steven Adams as a power forward. Now, there goes your spacing, but at the same time, you're going to have two really big, long, switchable defenders on the front end that can really, just guard every position on the floor. And that's how they're going to deploy Nerlens Noel. He's going to be a guy who can really defend everybody. And that's what the Thunder needs to be their bread and butter, to be frank. They need to just be an elite defensive team. They need to be a top 5 defensive team this year, whether or not they have Andre Roberson or not. They just need to be elite defensively because, frankly, they just don't have the shooting to go and, win shootouts with a Golden State or a Houston.
When you start talking about some of those second line rotations, and you're talking about Noel, Grant, possibly Hamidou Diallo out there at some point, Dennis Schroeder. I think it was said of Hamidou Diallo that he has nuclear athleticism.
Nuclear athleticism.
That second unit sort of strikes me as having some nuclear athleticism, Barry.
Well, this is standard operating procedure by the Thunder. That's the kind of players they like. Now, they're going to take any superstar that comes their way, but if they have to make a decision on a role player, they're going to want the guy with long arms that can jump, that can run. That's their idea of an ideal basketball player. Jeremy Grant is, we always say Nick Collison is Mr. Thunder. The truth is Jeremy Grant is Mr. Thunder. That's their model. Jeremy Grant is the prototype.
Yeah.
So it intrigues Sam Presti and Billy Donovan, I think, to have guys like you mentioned, those guys with long arms and a lot of bounce in their legs and can jump and move laterally and all those things. And I'm still remembered the thing that made me laugh a couple years ago. I forgot who it was. Some national guy was around. He's either, I couldn't even remember if it was a coach or if it was a broadcaster. But Antonio Daniels, who is on the Thunder broadcast team, he was out on the court but doing pregame, just monkeying around. And this guy walks by and says, "Typical Thunder, right there, long and athletic." So Antonio Daniels is they even hire broadcasters in that role. So they're going to try to use that.
Yeah.
They're definitely going to try to use that in terms of trying to create havoc and defense and getting out and running.
Look, Thunder can't shoot. There are a few guys on the team that can really shoot. Alex Abrinas, Patrick Patterson, Paul George. Those are your 3 guys who are really top level shooters on the Thunder. But there are going to be some nights where they're just going to run people and out jump people out the gym. And especially when they get Andre Roberson back, he was a guy who's really athletic and can defend multiple positions. They're going to be able to turn defense to offense quicker than any team in the league. And we've hardly mentioned guys like Abdel Nader and Hamidou Diallo. Those are really athletic long guys too in that 6'6", 6'7" range that can really get out and run. So they took a lot of guys that they had last year, the Kyle Singlers, the Josh Houstons, and Josh Houston was really athletic too. Nick Collison, Dakari Johnson, and they replaced them with long, young, athletic guys. And teams like the Houston Rockets and Warriors, while they're still going to be the cream of the crop, those are teams that are getting older too. And the Thunder sometimes is going to look really athletically superior to a lot of teams in the West.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about that second unit. I got no idea if they'll hit a shot from outside about 14 feet, but they're going to get back on defense. They're going to beat you down the floor on offense, and that can create problems. So it'll be interesting to see how that second unit fares as this season goes on.
And look, when you don't have shooting, you've got to find other ways to create open shots. Billy Donovan talks about this all the time. Guys have to cut hard. Guys have to know where they are on the court and make the right cuts at the right times. If these guys like Hamidou Diallo are cutting hard, if guys like Terrence Ferguson are making the right moves, then that opens up shots for other people. And if it doesn't open up a shot for somebody else, it opens up an alley-oop back door that Russell Westbrook or Dennis Schroeder are going to be able to find a guy for. So the Thunder is going to be playing above the rim. People are going to have to account for those cutters if they're making the right moves and they're doing the right things within the scheme. And that's where the Thunder is going to create open shots through their athleticism and their not just ball movement, but player movement as well.
All right, by this time next week, the Thunder will have played their first exhibition game. It's a week from yesterday, Wednesday, the 3rd at the arena here in downtown Oklahoma City at the Peak. So Pistons will be in town. We'll be dissecting that game as well as the blue-white scrimmage, which is set to happen over this weekend. Lots to talk about as this season really gets rolling, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.